We are here in Columbia, Ohio at the 52nd
Mm-hmm.
uh, reunion, 12th Armored Division reunion. I'm here with Robert Payne. Do you prefer Bob or?
Bob's fine.
Okay. My name is Michelle Colvin. It is August 30th, and let's get started. First off, why don't you just tell me where you were raised and when you were born?
I was born in Baltimore in 1921, April the 13th. Baltimore, that's Maryland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you remember about your early life? Do you remember activities or were you on a ranch or?
Oh no, we were in the what was then known as the suburbs, but actually it was a small, you call it a farmette, I guess, that my dad had, and I was there until I was ready to go to school. And then because the walk would have been too far, he moved into a different neighborhood, able to walk to school. And that's more like what you now call suburbia.
So what was your father's actual career?
He went from having a dairy to getting into the Baltimore Transit Company. He worked for the transit company until he retired, but at one time he did own a dairy.
Was he happy about the change, or was it for?
Well, I was too little to know. He sold the dairy, so I guess either competition was too much from major dairies, or he just got tired of doing that. And maybe, just not enough money in it. And then he went to work for a transit company.
What was your mother like? Did she work?
Typical housewife. Typical housewife. She was from Virginia, and of course we didn't have very many working mothers then, so she was a stay-at-home mom, and typical's what I can come up with.
How many siblings do you have?
I only had one brother who died before I was born.
Oh, that's too bad. So you got all the attention.
For all practical purposes, I was an only child, yes. But I'll never admit to being spoiled.
Good. What do you remember? How did the Depression influence your family?
Well, I'm sure it influenced them because things were tight, but my father worked the whole time. He was fortunate in that, and the transit company kept him going with enough money for us to survive, and I knew no hardship. My mom and dad may have known it, but I didn't.
What education background did you complete?
I got as far as high school and then took some courses primarily because I was in banking at the time at the University of Baltimore, but you couldn't really call it college credit courses. And about the time we were getting out of high school, we were also getting into the service, so that kind of influenced me.
How were you? What year did you become part of the service?
Say that over.
What year did you become part of the service?
1942, November 1942.
Were you excited, or was it something that you felt you had to do? Or?
Well, I guess everyone was excited thinking about it, but I think I was under the impression that you have to do it, and if you're going to make me do it, I will, but if I had my druthers, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't be there. Because, you didn't understand what it was all about. Go to Germany or wherever you were going to go, Japan. It was easier to maybe want to fight the Japanese than it was the Germans at the time, because after all they had that sneak attack on Pearl Harbor, and the Germans kind of jumped in and said, "Me too," after war was declared. But there were mixed emotions. Some people ran right down to the enlistment place and enlisted, and some people, I guess they thought they'd like to run some other way, and the rest of us just waited until we had to go. I wasn't waving a flag then because I didn't know. None of us knew what to expect.
What do you recall about hearing about Pearl Harbor?
Well, I can vividly remember that because it was on a Sunday afternoon, and Sunday afternoon was a rest time, And I think I had actually fallen asleep on the sofa listening to the radio, probably the Washington Redskins or something. And I woke up when the announcement came on. And I think the general feeling with people my age was, number one, we're going to be in it. Number two, all we knew about war was what we'd probably seen in the movies from World War I. And I would not have been at all surprised if the Japanese had attacked Baltimore that night. You know, we were ready, and you really didn't realize how hard it would have been for them to attack the main United States. But the fear was there, or the apprehension, I guess is a better word than fear. So that's how we were. And then, you know, as time went on, and President Roosevelt gave his famous speech and said, well, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and it kind of calmed us all down, and we settled down to do what we had to do.
Was your father involved in World War I?
No, he was too old.
What was his impression of it? Do you remember?
Of World War I or World War II?
World War I.
He didn't talk about it. He was too old to get in it, and I really don't recall ever hearing him speak about it. Of course, like all the kids, I asked him if he was in it, and he told me no, and that was the end of it.
So you got drafted, and where did you head to?
I think it was Camp Lee, Virginia is the first place they sent us, and you were there. I was there for, I think I got there on a Monday or a Tuesday, and I left on Thursday, and hauled us right into Camp Campbell. Biggest impression on that was, I believe he was a major that got on a train just before we got into Camp Campbell, and he said, all right, you all are in the armored forces now, so put your hat on the left-hand side of your head instead of the right. And that made us special right away.
Good for him. That's a good way to get you started, isn't it?
Yes, he did.
So what was your impressions of Camp Campbell? How long were you there?
I was there until the division moved. They went on maneuvers. You know, right now I can't quote dates on that. I just let that go out of my mind. But once I hit Campbell, I was with the 12th, stayed with the 12th, moved with the 12th, and stayed over in Europe with the 12th. I came home with the 2nd.
Can you remember the travel where you were probably in trains?
You going there?
Uh-huh.
The most I remember about that was that going through Kentucky was some of the most beautiful country I'd ever seen. You know, looking out the windows of the train, and of course we went over the mountains, and that was the biggest impression I had. There was no worry about where I'm going. They had me by that time, so that's the main thing that I carry with me as a remembrance. That plus the major with his hat speech.
So where did you go from Camp Campbell?
We went, well, in the middle of Camp Campbell, they sent me off to, I went to radio school at Campbell, and then they sent a certain group of us to Fort Knox and had another session with radio school. But I was still attached to the 12th Armored in Campbell, and then came back to Campbell and moved with them to, after maneuvers, to Barclay.
And what were your impressions of Camp Barclay?
Well, it was, I just liked the idea of being in Texas, because there again, you see all the movies about the Wild West movies and all in Texas, and I had a natural wonderment of what was Texas like, and there I was in Texas. And, as much as you can enjoy that type of stuff, I enjoyed what we were doing, and the fact that we were getting ready for something. But as far as the weather was concerned, that was nice. It was a lot different than Kentucky. The winter we spent in Kentucky was miserable as far as I was concerned. It was just too damp. But Texas weather I thought was all right, even when it was hot.
And what were you trained to do in
I kept right on with radio. Uh, I had had those two courses in Camp Campbell, and then I was part of the radio group in Barclay. This was in an armored car. It wasn't, like you'd think of radio now in a building or something. It was in an armored car.
And did you feel your training was sufficient?
Yes. In both of those schools I went to, they gave you all the time that you needed, and the instructors were good, and they made sure that you knew what you were doing. So yes is the answer to that.
Good. So from Camp Campbell, Barclay, you went to New York.
Short stay in New York, yes.
And how was the trip overseas?
With us, it was good because, as I recall, we were on, it was man, I can't think of it, but the governing ship in the fleet that was going over, the command ship or what have you. And we only had one contingent of troops, whereas the others, some of them, you spent one night on deck and the other night in the hold or in your bunk, and then back on deck. But we didn't have to do that, so we had kind of plush quarters in comparison with the others. And you thought a little bit about maybe some German submarine was going to be out there and cause you a problem, but it was really a quiet trip over, and you couldn't dwell on that all the time anyhow.
What did you do for entertainment?
Are we still on the boat?
Yeah.
The ship?
Yeah.
It is a ship, not a boat. I don't believe we had any entertainment. You entertained yourself because it was a case of, you're there, you go to eat 3 times a day, and you're pretty much on your own. You go up on deck if the weather permits and things of that nature. I don't remember. Of course, a lot of them, the entertainment was shooting crap or playing cards, but I wasn't good at either one. And I didn't have any money to do it with either, so I didn't get into that.
Do you remember the feeling on the ship of the other soldiers, and was the majority of them like ready gung-ho to get over there, or were they a little intimidated, or do you recall?
I think neither. We didn't have people, the John Wayne variety that was, when we get over there, we'll take care of them and all that sort of stuff. That's only in the movies anyhow, I believe. But there was nothing like, oh my golly, I'm going to be killed, I'll never see my family again. I'm sure people had those thoughts, but they didn't express them. They just kept them to themselves, and talked about the girl back home or the letters you got or whatever, but you didn't get into that. At least the people I was with didn't.
Did you have a girlfriend at the time?
Yes, I did. Don't get into that too much. Yes, we all did. Had somebody that you thought about. In a way, if you didn't have a girlfriend to think about, you were missing something. You weren't complete at that time, I guess. But yes.
Did you get letters?
Oh yeah.
They helped a lot.
Yes, letters from your girlfriends, letters from friends, letters from your family. I think most people will tell you that if you were at mail call and you didn't get one, you really felt left out. There was a void there. And sometimes you get 3 or 4, or sometimes only 1, but if there was one there, that's what counted. So
where did you land in Europe?
Well, we were in England first, and for $1,000 I couldn't tell you where we were there, but they said get off the ship, and so I got off the ship, and it was someplace on a big hillside, and we were in tents while we were there, and just waiting. I guess it was a staging area, but I don't know where it was. I can't recall anyhow.
So what was your next trip?
We just stayed there for a while and got to see London. Was in the Westminster Abbey and had the thrill of walking on Darwin's grave and a few things like that. All the other things were packed away, the very valuable things that are in Westminster Abbey. and saw the changing of the guard. And what's a place where they had all of the shows was Piccadilly Circus. We all had to do that bit. And then we were shipped over, and I think it was Le Havre that we landed in. And the first assignment we had, our troop anyhow, is we supposedly were, there were some German troops still on some islands in the channel. And we were supposed to walk up and down or be alert as to whether or not they were trying to get off of there. And they never tried. I don't blame them for not trying. The war was over for them. As long as they behaved themselves, nobody was going to bother them. But that was the first thing that we had.
What were the living situations like, living quarters?
Well, at first we were on the outside, and I remember it was raining. They set us up in some field that was just nothing but mud. That's all it was to it. It was just one big muddy field. And we pitched pup tents, and you were wet all the time because it rained all the time, but it had a big fire going in a barrel, and you could stand with your back to that barrel and dry off, and the front's getting wet, and then you turn around the other way and the back's getting wet, but we managed to survive. And we were fortunate because somebody in the, put the two pup tents together, you're holding four. And somebody went out and found some wood, and we put the wood down on the ground and then the blankets and all on that, so we were reasonably dry, whereas some of the others weren't. And the ones that weren't Boy Scouts forgot to dig a trench around that pup tent so the water came in. But I was a Boy Scout, so we had a trench, and the water didn't come in. That was when we first got over there in Europe, France.
What is the next experience you can remember after leaving there?
Well, I guess it was when we started, and we were moving towards what would be the front line. And there again, you didn't know what to expect. And my impression of it at that particular time was when they said, all right, you're going to go into combat, that we'd go and we wouldn't stop until somebody surrendered or you got shot or something happened, that you just keep on going. And I was really surprised when they pulled us back. So we were reconnaissance, we went out, and I guess we found what we were supposed to find, and then they pulled us back. And that was both good and bad, because you felt you were ready to just keep on going. And then they let you come back. And then you had to get ready to go again. And then you were saying, well, come on, let's take us back, And it played a sort of a seesaw with your emotions on that type of thing. But that's how they did it, and after a while we got accustomed to that, because we just didn't have enough heavy armament to go ahead and stand up against German tanks at all. In a way, it was find them and run. We got good at that.
Do you recall the first battle that you came across?
Well, the first under fire, rather than the first battle, and that was the very first day that we were committed to combat, and nothing happened close to me, so I was fortunate. But frankly, I didn't know what was going on. They said we're going to drive down here, and they tell the driver to drive, so he drove. I was part of what he was driving, so I went with him, and that was the beginning. And then for some reason, right after that, not too long after that, because I was in radio, there must have been someone else with me from the troop, but I was assigned to one of the combat commands as a radio operator. And I guess I was there maybe 1 or 2 days and taking messages from the outlying units into the combat command headquarters. And I'll always remember the first message is we were under counterattack and we needed help. This is the message as it came in. And I gave it to some officer in there, and they got things squared away, but that was my big message. Then they took us back. I guess they gave up on that, and I went back with the unit.
And explain how the orders came through. Explain what you were involved with.
Well, orders, as far as I was concerned, they came through some mysterious background there, and the lieutenant that was in our armored car would go back with the staff sergeant, and they'd have a meeting with the captain and anyone else who was there. Then they'd come back, and the word I got was, okay, we're moving out, this platoon first, another platoon second, another platoon third. And they didn't tell me where they were going. Once in a while they would give you some warning about, if they start shelling, get off the road and go straight up or something. But I didn't know, I just wasn't that high up. I was technician 4th grade because I was with the radio, and I guess by now you know a technician 4th grade was the same as a buck sergeant with his 3 stripes. And so they didn't have to consult me, they just told me.
Did you enjoy your position, or was it, did you feel grateful that you weren't right there in the front line?
Well, we were in the front.
Wow.
Because of reconnaissance, you see. But we had that liberty, privilege, or whatever you want to call it, of when we found the enemy, that by letting somebody else know where they were who could better handle what was going on, we could pull back. And we didn't run all the way to the rear every time, but we were able to notify where we had located any enemy positions, and then heavy fire from tanks and so forth could take over on that. We just didn't have it.
Were you ever injured?
No.
Do you recall any friends and buddies that you had that you could tell me about?
Well, you recall a lot of them. You want specifics? Well, I'll just give you the closest group to me. There were 4 of us. And I just finished not too long ago researching to find the 4th, but one was a fellow named Bill Mannion. He lived in Rochester, New York. Sam White, who now lives in Norfolk, Virginia. And I, and who's the 4th? There's White, DeNike, Payne, and Mannion. Mannion was in Rochester, New York. DeNike was in Peekskill, New York. I was in Baltimore, Maryland. And Sam White was someplace in Virginia. Now I know he's in Norfolk. And we were all pretty close. We had stayed together during basic training and so forth. And we were not together. Mannion and I were in the same platoon. White was transferred out to a troop of 92nd before it was over, and DeNike was in the 3rd platoon. And they were the people that I stayed with, when we weren't off on something special. The only one that was wounded was Mannion. He was wounded in the arm. And I have seen him on a couple of occasions since we were out of the service. And White. DeNike I saw twice back in the 40s, and then that was it. I haven't seen him since, and just recently I found out he had passed away. But they were the ones, and when you think about the service, they're the ones that come to my mind first as being friends, close friends.
And what do you remember doing as friends to keep the tension down?
Well, while we were overseas, during combat, there wasn't that much you could do, because if you pulled back at night, like a lot of times, when we pulled back, we formed a perimeter around the field artillery to prevent infiltration there. And you stayed with your platoon. Now I might see DeNike walk by or something like that, but there was, no way of any social activity. When we were on maneuvers and all, that was different. You'd go into town together and this sort of thing, but not once you got over there.
Did you ever have time? Did you ever get leave? during?
I don't remember ever getting it until it was over, though they did pull us back, I guess sort of a R&R thing, but not leave as such while the war was going on. If they were giving that out, they passed me up.
Did you have any involvement with the civilians during that time?
You had some involvement because they were there. I remember there was one family, and I guess they were right close on the German-French border, and Mannion found them, and he and I had dinner with them one night, and then later on, one of the biggest impressions of the civilians that were there is we were on a hill, and there was a small German town, and it was obvious that there were German soldiers there. And when morning came, they wanted us to go in there and flush them out. And so we started down that hillside, and off on the left, there was a farm, and there was a man and his wife, and they were the typical European German farmer type. He was a handsome guy with this white hair and a big white mustache, and she matched him with her gray hair, and I felt really sorry for them. They were both standing up out there with their hands up, and they were as nervous as they could be. And we had no more intentions of hurting them than beans, but they didn't know that was going to happen. We just walked right on by them and left them alone. But then there were other stories, people, German women who would say, that we weren't worth anything at all, and that we'd probably killed their husbands, and they might have been right. But outside of that, no close contact again until after the war was over. But while combat, not that much.
So, what can you tell me about a battle that comes to mind?
Well, a major one that I'm sure you've heard about now is Herlesheim, and that was the second time that they took me out of the troop and sent me up to be a sort of a radio liaison between the front troops and the headquarters in the back. And you've heard of that waterworks? And that's where I was, in the waterworks with the radio. We had a cable that would run from an armored car a number of feet down into a basement or a foxhole or wherever you happened to be, so that you weren't a good target. And I was in that waterworks with I guess the people who were in charge of the operation that was going on. And you knew pretty well the problems that they were having out there. And I spent a night learning all the prayers of all the people that were with me. I learned how to say Hail Mary as a Baptist, and I'm sure if there were some Jewish prayers there, I learned those. And then they got us out of there the next morning. They had no more need for us because apparently we had lost at that time, and they had to regroup, so they sent us back. And that was, I guess, the most memorable. It always will be. Excuse me.
Tell us a little bit more about that. Do you remember any of the names of the guys that you were?
Well, the two that I was with, I had we were in an armored car, and I had a driver, and I had with me the fellow who would have been the gunner, I guess, and he was an assistant radio operator. And the driver's name was Ziska, Z-I-S-K-A, and the gunner was Olersik. And they were both corporals, T5, which was equal to corporal. And the only other memorable thing is when they told us that we could go, there was a young fellow from the infantry who was coming back, and he was obviously in shock. He didn't look like he was over 17 years old to me. And he asked if he could get a ride back to where we were going, any place but up, and I don't blame him. And I had to pry his feet off of the seat that he was standing on when we got where we were to help him get out. He was just that tense from what had happened. And they didn't have an easy time of it. So that was the key points. That were the high points of it.
Do you, what can you tell us about the scenery that you remember during the battles? Do you remember seeing a lot of wounded, a lot of cries, or?
No, we didn't run into that often. Of course, there were people wounded, and I saw them being carried off, and it didn't affect you really when you saw a dead German soldier, you know. But if there was an American along the side of the road, then it all became real, you know, that you weren't untouchable, that you could suffer the same as they did. But it wasn't, again, it wasn't like you see in the movies. You know, you see these things where the hero runs through 5,000 bullets at one time. You don't do that, and that wasn't possible there either. But the first dead soldiers that I saw were German. They weren't American soldiers, and they were just laying on the side of the road. But it wasn't that I could look out of that armored car and see people falling left and right. Nothing like that.
Were you involved at all with the concentration camps?
When they were liberated, we were in one of the towns that the 12th Armored liberated, and my knowledge of really what was going on with Hitler and the Jewish people and all was very limited. I didn't realize until after things were almost over. But all of the Jewish people who had been liberated were coming out with the striped outfits on and all that sort of thing. And then we learned a little bit about what it was. But I remember seeing them, and they would not get too close to you because of lice and all this sort of thing. But they were obviously very happy that we were there. And it was a sad sight. But I did not go into the concentration camp. They told us not to go in there, and we didn't. But I remember the huge doors that looked like they were about twice as high as these doors here to this room, and heavy doors that led to the entrance. And I remember standing out there and seeing that, and these people milling around in, I guess, the square when we were there. That's it.
What did you feel about when you were learning about it all? How did you feel about that?
Well, it was an unbelievable thing that man could do that to man. There was no need for it to begin with. And to just try to eliminate an entire race is just unthinkable. And it still is. And the idea now that people are trying to say the Holocaust was in somebody's mind is unthinkable too, because it was there. There's no doubt about it. And when people try to write that off of the books now, I just don't know where they're coming from.
How did you feel about General Patton's position? Did you think?
Well, I think Patton was probably a master of tank warfare, but he got a bad reputation when he hit that soldier, and he suffered from this blood and guts combination they gave him, you know, his guts and our blood and this sort of thing. But I think because of the success he had, that every soldier had to like him and cheer him on, because if he was able to do what it looked like he could do, the thing would have been over a lot sooner. And I think history has proven that if supply had been able to keep up with him, he would have ruptured the German army a lot sooner. He would have broken through and really caused confusion. But as a general, as opposed to other generals, I don't know. He had to be good, or he wouldn't have been able to do what he did. You compare him to Eisenhower. Eisenhower was a different type of person. So I have no real thoughts on Patton. I was sorry when he was killed, when he died, but that's, you know, especially since it was after the war.
where you were when they declared the war over?
I don't remember a city or a town or anything like that. I can remember what I was doing. We were in a small, I guess it was a farm type thing, because you know that over there the farm and the barn and everything just hooked together, and we were crowded around my armored car, and we had the radio on, we had the BBC playing, and they were verifying the fact that the war was over. And of course Japan was still at it by then, but you know, we figured, well, we're going to have a rest here for a while anyhow before we have to do anything else. And there was none of this jumping up and down and shouting and cheering or anything like that. A bunch of them that had grown mustaches said they'd keep the mustache till the war was over, so they ran back and shaved and things like this. But that's where it was, and I remember that. I'll always remember that when it was over. Just standing there like that. And that it was a woman, a German woman, about the same time, and she came up to us and she said, "Der Krieg ist fertig, der Krieg ist fertig." And I said, "Yeah." And then it dawned on me that Blitzkrieg meant lightning war, and I never knew what that meant. All I thought was that was an expression. But when she brought up that, and then another one said, "Oh, the Blitz," and when there was lightning, and that's how I learned what Blitzkrieg was. Before that, I didn't know. Now, that'll get you a lot in your history, but that's how it goes.
What do you by chance, did you hear the local music radio stations while you were there? Radio station?
BBC.
Radio? Okay.
BBC is the only thing we got on. That what was it? There was a German woman that was propaganda along with the one in Japan. Sally, I think, was the name of one of them. Yeah. I never heard her. She would tell you about your wife or your girlfriend back home, what she was doing. Yeah. No, but I never heard her. It was always a BBC we tried to pick up.
Do you recall how far in advance you had heard that the war was coming to an end?
Well, there were rumors all the time, you know, but I guess it was just a matter of a couple of weeks or something that it looked like that for real it was going to end. When we received a sort of an unofficial word that the war was over, we were just about to go into the Bremer Pass, and it was snowing, and it was in May, but when we actually heard it, verified it, was in that little farmhouse.
You mentioned earlier that you had some involvement with civilians after the war. Can you tell me about that?
Oh, well, we were taking their houses. You had to have involvement with them, because when we went back and settled down, we were in Heidenheim, our troop was, and you had to have a billet. So they just displaced some of those German families and took over their homes, and we lived in their homes, and they had to just sort of bunk in with whoever in the neighborhood would let them in. And of course, that made them very unhappy. And they let us know about it, but there was nothing they could do about it. And you never found a Nazi. None of them were Nazis after the war was over. But we could find pictures of them sitting at a big banquet table with the swastika in the background, and we gave them a hard time over that. But that was the main involvement. There were also, where we were, there was a Russian DP camp and a Polish, and we got to know some of those people, and there's no real reflection on the Polish people, because I don't think they were organized. The Russians were, but the Russians got up every morning and did calisthenics and this sort of thing, and it kept them right in the beat of things, and the Polish people didn't. They just got up and laid around, I guess, until they were taken home. But it was a little bit of an experience to meet those people, and they were right there with us.
And how long were you there until?
Well, war ended in May. I I think that I was at that particular spot until about September, because along about that time they had to keep us busy and they had football equipment, and I got on the football team and they moved me into headquarters for that, and then that's when they started breaking us up and I was transferred to the 2nd Armored, and I was just not too far from Frankfurt on the Main is where we were with the 2nd. So I left Heidenheim, and that's where I was with the 2nd Armored.
Well, tell us about your activities and your responsibilities in Heidenheim for that 6 months or so.
You didn't have them. It really, you know, they tried to keep us active with a lot of activities that we liked. There was softball you could play and things of that nature, but I don't remember any. And of course, one time they came out and they went through the whole town, and we searched every house for any contraband material or guns or anything like that, and anything that signified the Nazi Party. And we were to take that out of the houses, and everyone was subject to search. So I think we used that as a scare tactic because we didn't do that. And that was the one big thing that we had. And of course, we had to keep the vehicles in shape, routine things like that. But pretty much, you know, they tried to keep you busy with sports activities, and they had, you know, we would have lectures on health and that sort of thing, and then there would be lectures and other things. They didn't just let you lay around and do nothing, but there were no real things that you would associate with the fact that maybe we would have been in Japan or something like that. That wasn't.
Did you acquire any souvenirs while you were there?
Yes, I did. I had some great German swords and a few other little things, and I had an offer of a trip to the Riviera. And I financed my trip to the Riviera by selling those swords to all the recruits that were just coming over. And they thought they were great. They could send them home, and I thought it was great to get rid of them. I could go out and have a good time. The only thing I ended up with when I went home was a Belgian .45 pistol, and maybe some little pin with a swastika on it or something like that, but nothing major.
So did you, I guess you did have passes for time off?
Well, I got to the Riviera because I played football, but I don't well, you could, I guess, if you had reason, go to a city. And I remember I was, I guess, on a pass one time because I was with the lieutenant who was in charge of our platoon, he and I and one of the sergeants, and we went to some little town. I guess he had something to do, but that was like a pass. And we went there and back. But other than that, because they had that no fraternization thing going for a while. $64 was a lot of money, and we didn't get too involved in that. At least when they were looking, we didn't. But I don't remember, you know, having the availability of passes.
And how was your trip to the Riviera?
It was great. It was a nice place. I was there in January, and the weather was very nice. It was a little chilly at night, but it was nice and balmy during the day. And where Prince Rainier is, you could walk down there and see part of that, but you couldn't go on it, on his territory. And if you knew where to go at night, you could eat steak dinners every night. And we found somebody who told us where they were, so we managed to do that. And the accommodations were nice. Everything about that was nice. And it would be a great place to visit now, I suppose.
When did you return to the States?
February 46.
And what was the reunion like?
We mean coming home?
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, when we came into New York Harbor, by that time so many of us had come home that they'd stopped the big celebrations, and all they had was one tugboat blowing, a fireboat, I guess it was, with the spout of water going up in the air, and they had one band playing, and it didn't make any difference to us. It would have been great, I guess, because the people who came home first, they really got the reception, and they deserved it because they've been there the longest. But I was happy enough. I didn't get down and kiss the ground or anything like that, but I was happy to be home. And they shipped me down to Fort Meade in Maryland. And the first night there, they offered me a pass so I could go in town, but I figured I'm not going into town until I can stay, and be done with this. So I didn't go that first night, and I was discharged the next day. I went on home, and it was nice to be home. My mother and father were both living then, and my wife, and so it was a nice reunion.
So when were you married?
In 1943. This was while I was in the service, but I wasn't before I went in. There was a lot of us that did that.
And what did you do when you returned? Did you just go right into a job or school?
Well, within a month, yes. Things weren't all that great as far as getting jobs and things of that nature. I remember because I'd been in radio, I was listening to code on the radio, and I picked up some fellow was in the merchant marine service, I guess, and he had radioed his dad about how were things, and his dad radioed back, "Stay on the ship, jobs are not easy here." So that was about the way it was. If you wanted to go back to the job you had before, you could. I think there was a law that dictated that. But I had been in the banking business, and I wasn't interested in going back. So
did you take advantage of the GI Bill, or?
I took advantage of it to buy a house, not for education. But I did do that with the house. I think it got a real low interest rate of 4.5%, something like that.
And where was that at?
Pardon?
Where did you purchase your home?
Outside of Baltimore. No, I didn't either. I was gone from Baltimore. I purchased that in College Park, Maryland, where the University of Maryland is located. So.
Okay. Well, is there anything that you would like to tell us that we haven't gone over? Any stories that you wanted to convey?
Well, stories.
Or feelings, or?
Well, I do have some feelings, and that is that when you're talking about that, there's nothing there to glamorize, really. I was extremely fortunate in that I didn't see or wasn't involved in a lot of horrendous situations where people were falling left and right and all that sort of thing. And that Hurleshine thing was bad enough. But my biggest feeling out of it was thank God for the infantry, because they stood it all, and they're the ones that suffered, and they're the ones that couldn't get back at night. They stayed in the rain, and they stayed in the foxholes, and there was nothing glamorous about it. But without them, nobody goes anyplace. And I think it's, despite the fact that we now have all this modern equipment, and they can kill you from 1,000 miles away if they want to, in order to win, someone is going to have to take the ground. And when they take the ground, they can't do it without the infantry. And the most credit in my book has to go to them. Anybody you see that was in the infantry and had that infantryman's badge, he's the one. I don't care about your colonels and your generals and all this. We needed the brains up at the top, I'll grant you. But all the brain power in the world would be no good without them. And so I say amen to the infantry. That's about it, I guess.
Great.
Okay?
That's wonderful. Did you have any questions for him?
I just have one question. I am really big into the Boy Scout, and I have to ask, did you ever make Eagle?
I have a good story for you in the Boy Scouts. No, I didn't make Eagle. I took the Boy Scouts gradually. I liked it. And I would, they had this, or you go down once a month and you could take additional tests and you go from tenderfoot to second class to first class. Well, I was going along at a great speed and I had to do nature and stars. And they asked me, I could pick out those stars with no trouble. And they said, well, okay, how about nature? Your observations. Does a robin run or hop? And I said, robin, run or hop? So I guessed, I'm not sure well I guessed, but I was wrong. And I went back 3 or 4 times. I never did pass that nature and stars, so I never got to be first class. I was ready to go in the Army, and I still hadn't passed the thing. But the Boy Scouts taught me a lot that I used while I was in the service. And those people that didn't, just like I said, if you didn't dig that trench around the tent, there was something wrong with you. You had to pray for no rain or you were going to get wet. That's all there was to it. And when I started digging that trench, I said, what are you doing out there anyhow? I said, I'm telling you, if it rains, this is going to keep you from getting wet. So we dug it. The people next to us, you would hear them getting up in the middle of the night and their blankets were wet and everything else. So the Boy Scouts was a great thing. I'd recommend it to any young boy, anytime.
What else did you learn other than digging trenches that helped you out in Europe?
Well, you knew how to tie knots. You could do almost anything. And if you were on your own, you knew how to cook something because you had to do a little bit of cooking. Everything that they did in the Scouts, I think, was helpful. It was just a nice thing to be in. And I'm sure there were other things that I used because you're living in the outdoors and even down to the moss on the trees always points to the north and things of that nature. And finding the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, you're not lost. It's as good as a compass or even reading a compass and things like that. There were a lot of times, incidentally, going back to the service that I think back and I don't know how we found our way because they sent me back one time with 13 prisoners. And they just said, it's back that way. Go back that way, and that's where headquarters is. Man, I have 13 people. I wasn't alone. I had 2 other men with me and 13 German prisoners and 1 fatality on a Jeep from our company. But we just hiked on off and found it, and I have no idea how we did it. A couple of times we went back like that. And you just went by a gut feeling, and that too, I think, was an awareness that you got from early training that could be attributed to Boy Scouts, to know where you are and be prepared and things of that nature. You just had to have a sense of where you were and direction. And so we did. Overall, I say I was lucky. Okay?
Good enough.
That's good?
Thank you so much.
All right. And I didn't need your water, but I'll use it now.